if psychology and pop culture had a baby, they'd call it Shrink Tank.
A new paper reveals more intelligent people are quicker to learn and unlearn.
90% chance that there's some weird animal out there. Yeah.
Stern's been doing this forever, and far more extreme. From Nashville and Charlotte, this is the Shrink Tank Podcast.
Welcome, everybody. If you're joining us for the first time, a special welcome to you. If you're coming back for more, thanks so much for joining us again. I am not Dave Verhagen, and I'm not in Nashville. I'm Jonathan Hederle, our certified Asian on the Shrink Tank Podcast. We got a great show for you all. Our trending topic is genealogy, DNA, and the Golden State Killer. But first, let's meet the rest of the Charlotte panel here. Dr. Emma Kate Wright is here. Emma, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right today. I hope you're well.
I'm doing fine. Do you have an adequate amount of caffeine or stimulant to get you through the podcast?
It's always debatable. Never know, because I need it to help me focus. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll find out.
I really feel like we need to capture some pre-podcast footage for people to see what Emma Kate is like leading up to recording.
Oh, yeah. It's a nightmare.
No, and for those who don't know, I actually am seated facing away from any windows to avoid distractions. So
that's right.
That has to happen.
Look, a squirrel.
Where?
Well, not only that, even your coffee cup seems larger in volume than mine. And so it just feels like the amount of constant liquid attention that you need to.
Caffeine IV.
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Basically.
But we're glad that you are pumped up and ready to go. And Dr. Frank Gaskell is with us. Franklin, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good.
Yeah, anything new to report on your part?
New to report. Not exactly. It's been pretty steady Eddie, I would say.
Oh, yeah?
Although I'm really loving Fortnite, as always.
As always. Well, good for that. I've never played a single minute of Fortnite.
You've never played hardly a minute of a video game.
Well, it's really fun, actually.
Yeah.
I don't normally like to agree with Frank on many things because, it's Frank.
Reasons.
But,
Yeah, you don't want to give him a bigger forehead.
No, I don't want to make him feel good about himself. Yeah.
That makes sense. Well, each week I troll the internet to find a great story of psychology in the news for our first segment that we call
Being Human.
In a study funded by the National Institute of Health, researchers are studying midday napping, nighttime sleep duration, and sleep quality. Specifically, how it may aid teens and learning. So daytime napping is quite controversial in the US, but in China, time for napping is built into the post-lunch schedule for many adults in work settings and students at school. And what this study discovered is routine nappers who nap 5 to 7 days in a week had sustained attention, better nonverbal reasoning ability, and spatial memory. Now, how long to nap is also an important question. They found the sweet spot is between 30 to 60 minutes. A nap any longer than 1 hour tends to interfere with circadian rhythm. And researchers were surprised to find a positive relationship to midday napping and nighttime sleep, which is different than the literature. So habitual nappers who nap more often tended to have a better nighttime sleep. Emma Kate, as our resident psychologist who dozes off during podcast recordings, what do you think of these findings?
I actually really like this in the sense that I can really kind of see how it makes sense intuitively. Just if you take a nap, you're going to get some, refreshing rejuvenation. You're going to feel a little bit more alert. I know Dave, for those who are newer listeners, Dave, our other podcaster, he is a frequent napper.
Well, that's why he's not here.
He's
napping.
probably napping. So, but yeah, I remember when I was younger hating naps and thinking this is complete garbage. I want to keep playing outside, in preschool. And then I think they continued that into kindergarten. But now I found that my sweet spot for a nap is, so this article is talking about 30 to 60 minutes. I really can't surpass 20 to 30 minutes. Otherwise, I feel really groggy. And then I kind of have maxed out that window where I'll go into a deeper sleep too quickly.
That's me too. If I take a nap, if I take about a 15 to 20 minute nap, I'm good. But if I go longer than that, it's really hard to fall asleep and then I have insane dreams. So that's not good.
I cannot nap. If I nap, it has to be over 2 hours long. Otherwise, I wake up and I'm irritable. I don't feel better. I actually feel
You mean
worse.
different from always?
No, this is jovial Jonathan.
Oh, boy.
Jovial Jonathan.
Whereas Julie, my wife, she could fall asleep at a stoplight if you gave her the opportunity. So I think she's actually more Asian than me based upon this study.
Yeah.
I wonder what our resident sleep specialist, Dr. Kristen Daly, would say about
Oh,
this.
that's
We
a
should
good
probably have her listen to this and weigh in a little bit.
Yeah, because it's really interesting how it's really pitting westernized culture and understanding about sleep and naps versus a more Eastern meditative sort of culture. But but if you think about even Spain and parts of Europe with siestas, this idea of creating space as part of your routine in the afternoon to replenish versus just continually pushing yourself to be performance driven in the workforce.
Yeah, and I actually studied abroad in Salamanca in Spain, and that was the hardest thing for me to adjust to was having an actual nap. I would do my classes in the morning, and then I would go to my host family's home, and we would have lunch, and then we'd have a nap. And I actually went out and kind of walked around, and it's really mind-blowing to see actual businesses just all closed down and everyone's doing the same thing. But part of this comes from necessity where that culture, Spanish culture, they are eating dinner at 8 or 9 versus in America here, we'll eat dinner at 5. We're ready to go.
And that's not even for retirees that eat
Right.
at 3:30 or 4 in the afternoon because they need space and time for bingo in the evening.
Yeah, I don't think I want to go to Spain. That sounds kind of scary.
Well, and for me, napping I've never even thought of as soothing and relaxing because in kindergarten we had required nap time, and I remember an incident where everybody had their own nap mats, and I placed mine down, and this kid named Joey O'Connell put his nap mat right next to mine, but then another student, Jamie Grant, who was this really big girl, she ended up playing varsity football in high school.
Wow.
She wanted to nap next to me and Joey refused, so she bit him and drew blood in kindergarten. He was screaming and wailing. And so the idea of that's supposed to be your relaxing time where
your
everybody
soothing
calms
time.
down. So, well, we would love to hear what you think about this study. Do you think scheduled naps would actually improve people's learning? Do you think westernized culture gets it right or wrong? Let us know at feedback@shrinktank.com. But now we're going to pivot to our trending topic, and I'm going to throw this over to my colleague, Dr. Frankie, over here.
Thank you, Jonathan Hedderly. So this part of the podcast is focusing on genealogy, DNA, and the Golden State Killer. And this story has absolutely fascinated me and led to some also interesting areas of research. But essentially, the Golden State Killer, this was a guy back in the 70s and 80s that was known as I believe the East Bay or East Area rapist. And he had raped, I want to say, I can't even remember how many, but a lot of people. But his method of being a serial rapist was terrifying because he would tie their hands and tie their feet after he'd gotten into the house and shined a light in their face with a gun. And he said, "Be quiet, don't say a word, or I'll kill you, I'll kill you, I'll kill you." And then he would rape them, and then he would say, "Don't make a sound. If you make a sound, I'll kill you." And then he would quietly walk out of the house while they had to sit there in silence, wondering if he'd left or not, which gave him plenty of time to escape. And the detectives work on this. It was just, they couldn't crack the case. There were no DNA matches, there were no fingerprints, they couldn't find it. But then there was a murder in the Golden State area, or was not Sacramento, another place further south. And the detectives knew that this guy was probably going to escalate to go from raping to murder. And he did. He started murdering people, and they just couldn't find him. They could not find this guy. So there was the detective who's working on this case. He was going to retire in about 9 months, and he really, really wanted to crack this case. More resources had been used on this particular case than I think any other in that area or maybe in California history. And he had seen a show, I think a documentary or something that said that these genealogy websites were able to track down a kidnapping victim's kidnapper using his DNA. And so he thought, well, I'll pitch this, and found a website that you can take DNA, upload it to the site, and it then tracks down relatives. And he felt, well, this is going to be a shot in the dark. There's no way. But he managed to track down DNA that had been saved in a freezer, which was a miracle in and of itself, because most of this guy's DNA had had decomposed or fallen apart that they couldn't use it. And he uploaded it, and they found a great-great-great-grandparent from the 1800s. So that led to 25 family trees, and these detectives worked in their spare time on the weekends without pay, tracking down relatives by using obituaries, newspaper clippings, grave site finders, to where they created all these family trees, and they narrowed it down to 1,000 people. Then they started looking for the age range. Somebody who lived near Sacramento, which narrowed it down to 2 people. And both looked fairly promising. And one, they thought they were sure it was going to be him, but that got ruled out. Then the police grabbed, I think, a coffee cup or something that this guy had been drinking out of, her, took the DNA, uploaded it, and said it was a match. That's how they got this guy. And he was a former police officer and had bought guns at the time that the murders happened. So they would just track all this stuff down and found him. And it made my hair stand up reading this, because I'm thinking, well, how many other unsolved murders can we use? So I don't know. Did you guys follow the story or?
Yes, I followed it not quite as closely as you did in terms of the level of detail, but I can't imagine that this will not help websites like 23andMe and Ancestry.com, because it's like, we will support people to track down murderers. Like, I feel like this is like great promotion for them, even though I kind of wonder, because I know they're private. So I've done 23andMe, and we'll probably talk about whether or not you guys have. But my understanding is they're very careful about what they release, and I'm assuming they had to have appropriate warrants to get that sort of information. But even then, I'm kind of wondering, it makes me more curious about these third-party things and what that's all about, and there's some interesting ethical questions that come up.
That's right. So, Jonathan, have you done 23andMe?
No. It'd be really interesting, because I know absolutely nothing about my family. For those of you that are not familiar with our podcast, I am adopted. I was born in Seoul, South Korea. I have a lot of paperwork of where I was born, orphanages or foster homes, but no relevant family history or information.
How would you feel about doing it?
Well, I'd be really curious, because here's something interesting that happened in college. So I grew up in Washington State, but I went to school in Southern California. And Southern California has a pretty prominent Korean population. So there was a lot of Koreans at the college I went to. That was really the first time I was ever around any Asian community that weren't adopted. And I remember vividly telling a bunch of Korean students that I was Korean, I was adopted, and they would look at me with even narrower eyes, and they would say, like, you look Chinese. You're not Korean, you Chinese. And then they'd turn to another Korean, like, doesn't he look Chinese? And the other Korean goes, oh, definitely look Chinese. But then there was these Chinese people over here, and they're like, no, he's not Chinese, he's Korean. It felt like nobody wanted me. Like they were like fighting who had to claim me. So I'd be interested.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I am also adopted,
but not Asian.
And so my background, from what I gathered when I got my health records at 21, was that my biological parents were in high school, and so they put me up for adoption, and I did do 23andMe. And I was just kind of excited to see what would show up. And eventually I probably will look for biological family, but I am apparently predominantly English and Irish and like Northern European.
So have you made it public so that potentially, like, hey, Mom?
Actually, yes, I have.
Wow.
But yeah, no, that would be crazy. I don't have any like first or second relatives of it. Like there's no first cousins or second cousins. I have, there's like 1,000 third or fourth cousins. And it seems like most of them are in like California, Texas, and then Florida. But I don't know if that's just because those states are so large that maybe that could be why. But
Where the large prisons are. Yeah.
yes, all the convicts.
Do either of you have any thoughts about the ethics of even going through this process of not only the genealogy trees, but just looking at your own DNA?
I mean, yeah, I think there's some really interesting things that could come up. For example, if you were related to like Hitler, like I don't think I would really want people to know that. Like, so
You guys have the same eyebrows.
right? It's true. No,
And the mustache.
But no, but
The salute.
no, but I feel like genuinely, there's so much information access nowadays that if you did want something to be limited, you would have to be very knowledgeable about what your rights are. And a lot of people just are not going to take that time to follow through with educating themselves.
I have some concerns about it.
Everything?
Right.
Everything. I was very nervous doing this. I got it for Christmas as a gift, and I didn't do it until recently. I mean, I got my results 2 weeks ago. That's how paranoid I was about it. Because my grandfather passed away from Alzheimer's, and I really didn't want to know if I was at risk for that. So when I got the report, it took me a good week before I'd even click on the link. And it really relieved me. I'm at risk for essentially nothing, which
we know how it's not accurate.
Right.
But it's like negative for all these things except for something to do with my eyes. But it also said I'm in order of sort of importance, I'm more likely to be anxious, depressed, and to have allergies, which are all very true.
Yeah.
And that it made me feel a little weird. But I then thought, man, what if somebody took this test and it says you have early onset risk for Alzheimer's?
Well, they probably wouldn't remember that.
No,
eventually.
they might not. Well, but one of the things that's important for those of you who haven't done these sorts of tests is they try really hard to make it clear that just because you have to have both variants in order to have the disease. And so oftentimes you're just a carrier. And so you might have one variant, but not another. And even then, like, let's say you don't have any of the variants, you're still at risk to develop these things. So, Frank, there's still hope.
There's still hope, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because a couple weeks ago, we talked about Westworld and whether or not you're a techno-optimist or a techno-pessimist. And I tend to be more optimistic with technology, even though I think overall I'm a critical or pessimistic person. But this whole idea of leaving sort of like this paper trail of your genealogy and the concerns about privacy or the government using those against you or other people, that does raise some legitimate concerns for me. I mean, I basically feel like I just outlined 1,000 sci-fi short stories or Twilight Zone episodes right then and there. But here's something for you guys to think about. Because it's the only real world that I've ever known. I've never known anything like, am I at a higher risk for this? Or am I at a higher risk for that? Like, imagine living life where you don't know if there's a family history of breast cancer or Alzheimer's or heart problems. That's sort of kind of what I've experienced. And there's a part of me that kind of likes that ignorance is bliss. Like, if I just focus on normal healthy living and those types of decisions and let life sort of play out its course. Because to me, there is something pretty freeing with the idea of like, maybe I do have some genetic or, family, risk, but I'm pretty happy not knowing any of that.
Yeah, and I see that 100% where, sometimes people just don't want to know because it's too scary. And then they're like, well, I'm still going to live the life I want to live. But on the flip side of that, I'll give an example with my adopted father. So his father passed away from prostate cancer. And then his grandfather passed away from a heart attack. And because he knew his family history, they were very careful about monitoring for cancer. And sure enough, they caught his prostate cancer very early, so he was able to recover from that. And then my dad is an active person. He just ran like a full marathon, like right at 70. He's ridiculous. And so he had a heart attack last May, and we were all shocked. but it was a mild heart attack, and he already was very educated in terms of what would that actually look like because he knew his grandfather passed away from this. So I see both sides of the coin, and I think it's really just about like, what do you want? Like, do you want to know or not?
Well, I already know whatever kind of cancer you get from eating too much cured meat and pork,
You'll get it.
that's
Ew.
what I'm going to get.
Yeah. I really want you to take this, Hedderly.
Why?
Because, well, it shows you a map of where on Earth you came from. And I can't remember the exact number, but there's something like we all came from 12 or 13 mothers, a specific grouping of moms.
That sounds creepy.
I know it is. But where I came from essentially is sub-Saharan East Africa. And
You're African?
well, 0.3%. And it shows sort of your trajectory and how your ancestry moved, where mine went to 63% of it is from Great Britain and nearly all of the rest is from Ireland, which blew my mind because I was told all my life that I'm Scottish. Well, I'm not. I'm Irish, which now I don't know what to do about that. But I want to see.
I got to rethink this whole life
I
now.
know. I want to see your trajectory of where like that would
Like,
be
did I start
fascinating.
out in Asia, but then I go to Great Britain,
Well, you
and then
know,
I took a.
Oh, you're an idiot. Where you would start out, like where in Africa did you start out, and because you'd have to go east. But what did that look like? And it would have had to have happened way before. Well, I would see. Oh, maybe not. I was thinking it may happen well before Europe. But here's the other thing. I have more Neanderthal
Yeah, you do.
than 95% of the people tested.
Now, I feel like you shouldn't share that.
Well, it bothers me. It really does bother me. And it makes me question a few things because there was a cave in France that I believe we've talked about on the podcast where
I think you've talked about on the podcast.
they found these people that did the cave paintings and they're amazing. But what they found out is these were like more human than Neanderthals. But they were living near the Neanderthals, so some of these artistic people had babies with Neanderthals, which is where apparently I come from. But the Neanderthals, they didn't know how to do art or draw. Mm-hmm. So I think they were kind of dumber. So that may explain a little bit of me.
Okay, yeah, right. So you're saying you're related to the dumber people.
Yeah,
Got it.
I'm more of an animal.
Got it.
Well, and this is interesting because we've talked offline a little bit about comparing and contrasting our attachment disorders.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I really think it is a byproduct of being adopted, and then my family very early on having a lot of marital problems, my parents divorced, and I basically was the youngest of four, but I essentially raised myself in a lot of ways at a very early age.
Like a wolf.
Yeah, very self-reliant. But with all of those factors together, I just don't have this like embedded deep interest in family and family roots. And it fascinates me, even though I know I'm atypical in that way, why something like 23andMe would be so interesting to other people. Like there is not a part of my brain that I get it on an intellectual level, on a personal level. Like people always ask me, don't you want to know more about your family? Wouldn't you want to travel and visit Korea? And I'll be like, yeah, I guess that'd be cool. Like, and my mom saved all the paperwork. And when I turned 13, she gave me a notebook with all of the resources that she had as a part of the adoption process. I've skimmed it once or twice and kind of looked up. Like, to me, it just, there is no void and really no interest.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me throw out one little piece before we get off this topic. And this research was fascinating to me. So there's this little thing called a nematode. It's a worm. And scientists injected something into these worms so that they would glow under ultraviolet light. And they put it in different environments. And these worms live very short lives. And they would go through these generations where the worm would glow in a colder room less than it would in a warmer room. And ultimately, they bred nematodes that would glow brightly in the cold room based on genetic memory. And what they're saying is our DNA doesn't necessarily change. It can mutate, but there's this other environmental type DNA that lasts. And it lasts 14 generations in these nematodes. And what the researchers are suggesting that our DNA carries the memories of our ancestors. One example they gave was that Jewish people post-Holocaust have less of that cortisol that allows them to tolerate stress. So they're more likely to get stressed. And that there are memories of our grandparents that are biologically based that have prepared us for the future, and that's where they carried on. And I'll take one step further. This Golden State Killer was one messed up guy.
Yes.
And if you say, where did his DNA come from? The 1800s California? That was a rough time.
The wild
West.
Right.
So is he carrying the memory of sort of stress and fight or flight response?
But even then, that makes me think about that kind of scary bunny trail, going back to the ethical questions, like, how is this information going to be used by people in power, by health insurance companies? That's the biggest thing I worry about, where it's like, okay, so, if somehow they get access to this sort of information, are they going to, limit you from having insurance or whatever? And I think back to even not that long ago, I mean, about 100 years ago, we were still practicing eugenics here in the United States.
1930s.
People were being sterilized, not able to have kids against their will.
Too bad they didn't find Hetterly back then.
Oh, God. But no.
So the most anxious, neurotic amoeba on Earth.
No, but it's like, it's just, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think it's going to be used for a lot of good. But again, it's about trying to safeguard what information you are willing to put out there.
Which is why everybody should be watching Westworld. Genetics are playing a significant role.
Well, we would be so interested to get feedback from you all, especially if you have done a lot of research of your own family history, genealogy, taken the 23andMe. What are some things that have been quite surprising, or just even some of the other stories that we've talked about here today? What are some of the unexpected kind of findings you have found when you dig up stories from your family history and past? And Frank, it sounds like you still have a doozy here you want to share.
I want everybody who's listening to sign up for 23andMe, and we will find Emma Kate and Hetterly's parents. Maybe they're a listener.
There you go. And we also want to find, is there actually a bigger Neanderthal out there than Frank Gaskell?
Unfortunately, it's my wife. She's 99%.
Wow.
No, really, she is 99.
Oh, my gosh.
I think that's why she's 6 feet tall.
So you can find us and give us feedback at feedback@shrinktank.com. We're going to shift to our final segment that we call Doctor's Orders. Frank Gaskell, what do you got for us?
Well, with summer quickly approaching, I've recommended this way back in the past, but I have to recommend it again. I've read this book 3 or 4 times. It's called In the Heart of the Sea, and it's the story of the whale ship Essex, one of the best books I've ever read. And it is the true accounting of the white bull whale that attacked the Essex in the Pacific, upon which Herman Melville wrote the story Moby Dick.
Very good. Emma Kate.
I may have spoken about this before in the past, but my brother is a chef that's worked at some of the best restaurants in the country, the French Laundry, and at Little Washington is where he's currently at. And so I am obsessed with a show on Netflix called The Chef's Table. And they actually just showed season 4 is out now, which is all about pastries. And so I watch it and I salivate and I get really hungry. And the first episode that I just watched was about Christina Tosi and her milk bar, where she created stuff like crack pie and
yeah, she did.
She created.
You can't eat any of these
I can't
things.
eat. No, I
None of
can't
it.
eat any. I'm lactose intolerant.
Where'd you come up with these names? Crack pie.
No, literally, it's called crack pie. Okay. And then there's cereal milk flavored soft serve ice cream, and she doesn't put frosting around her cakes. And so it's like so awesome hearing about this sort of like evolution and how these people get to this place of notoriety and what their food is and what they're all about. So check it out.
In my doctor's orders, I have 2. One is recently our sound engineer, Sean Beck, and I both attended a concert by Beck, and it was a hugely entertaining and energetic set. So I want to just shout out and recommend folks, if you get the chance to see Beck live, do so, but also pick up his latest album, Colors, which is really fun and entertaining. And the second recommendation I would have is Netflix has dropped the John Mulaney comedy special, Kid Gorgeous, at Radio City Music Hall. Check it out. I don't think it reached the highs of his last special, The Comeback Kid, but it's still widely entertaining. John Mulaney, one of my favorite comedians. Kid Gorgeous at Radio City. And that's it for this edition of the Shrink Tank podcast. Check out shrinktank.com for great articles and videos. You can also find links to our Doctor's Orders products. Follow us on Twitter at shrink_tank and like us on Facebook. For questions or comments, write us at feedback@shrinktank.com. Our producer and theme music composer is Sean Beck. For Emma Kate Wright, Frank Gaskell, I'm Jonathan Hedderly in Charlotte. Tell your friends about us and make it a great week.
Yeah.